Everything you've been taught about manifestation is backwards. Every visualization session, every affirmation you repeat, every technique you practice is actually locking you into the exact timeline you're trying to escape. This isn't about doing manifestation wrong. This is about a fundamental misunderstanding of how timeline collapse actually works at the quantum level. There's one decision, just one, that collapses probability waves into your lived reality. And the moment you see what's really happening, everything inverts. Your dream life stops being something you chase and becomes something that chases you. Not through more effort, not through better techniques, through a single recognition so simple, so immediate, so counterintuitive that most people will hear this and still not do it because it contradicts everything they've been taught. You're about to discover why trying to manifest is the exact mechanism keeping your desires away.
You're doing it backwards. Right now, in this exact moment, every manifestation technique you've learned, every visualization you've practiced, every affirmation you've repeated is actually pushing your desired reality further away. Not because the techniques are wrong, not because you're not doing them correctly, but because of a fundamental misunderstanding about how timeline collapse actually works at the quantum level. And the moment you see what's really happening, the moment you understand the one decision that actually collapses probability waves into your experienced reality, everything inverts. Your dream timeline stops being something you're chasing and becomes something that's chasing you. Not through more effort, not through better techniques, but through a single recognition that dissolves the entire structure of manifestation work and replaces it with something so simple, so immediate, so counterintuitive that most people will read this and still not do it because it contradicts everything they've been taught. Let me show you what I discovered after 5 years of failing at manifestation. I had vision boards. I had detailed scripts of my ideal life. I could visualize my desired reality so vividly that I could taste it, smell it, feel it in my nervous system. I did visualization practices every night. I affirmed throughout the day. I worked with energy, with frequency, with every technique that promised to shift me into my dream timeline, and nothing changed. My external reality remained stubbornly identical to what I was trying to escape. Same financial situation, same relationship patterns, same sense of being stuck in a life that felt like a waiting room for the life I actually wanted to live. But here's what I didn't understand. What nobody tells you about timeline mechanics. Every moment you spend trying to manifest something, you're making a fundamental decision about which timeline you're collapsing into your experience. And it's not the timeline you think. The act of trying to manifest, the effort of reaching toward a desired reality, the energy of wanting something you don't have, this is a decision, a quantum measurement, a collapse of probability waves. But it's collapsing you into the timeline where you're someone who needs to manifest, someone who doesn't have what they want, someone who exists in the gap between current reality and desired reality. And that timeline, the one where you're always reaching, always trying, always in the process of manifesting, that timeline is perfectly stable. It can sustain itself indefinitely because the more you try to manifest your way out of it, the more you're confirming through your actions and energy that you exist in the timeline where manifestation is necessary. I discovered this mechanism on a Tuesday afternoon in March. I was doing my visualization practice, deeply immersed in the feeling of my desired reality, when suddenly a thought appeared that shattered everything. If I already existed in the timeline where this is real, would I be doing this practice? The answer was immediate and devastating. No. If I already existed in the timeline where my desires were actualized, I wouldn't be visualizing them. I wouldn't be affirming them. I wouldn't be trying to feel them into existence. I would just be living them. The practice itself was proof that I was operating from the wrong timeline. And every moment I spent in that practice was a measurement, an observation, a collapse of probability that locked me more firmly into the timeline where I needed the practice because I didn't have the reality. Let me explain exactly what's happening at the quantum level when you try to manifest something. Because once you understand the actual mechanism, you'll see why trying has always been the problem. In quantum mechanics, particles exist in superposition, meaning they exist in all possible states simultaneously until observation occurs. The moment conscious observation happens, the superposition collapses into one specific state. This is verified, repeatable physics. The double-slit experiment proves it. The observer effect is not mysticism. It's measurable reality. But here's what most people don't understand about how this applies to your lived experience. Timelines are not destinations you travel to. Timelines are probability distributions that exist simultaneously in the quantum field. Every possible version of your life, every possible outcome, every possible reality exists right now as a probability wave. And the timeline you experience as your reality is determined by which probability wave your consciousness is collapsing through continuous observation. When you try to manifest something, when you visualize your desired reality while sitting in your current reality, you're making an observation. You're performing a quantum measurement. But what are you actually observing? You're observing the gap, the distance between where you are and where you want to be. You're observing lack, absence, not yet having. And reality, which is not a fixed structure but a responsive probability field that organizes itself around observation, reads that measurement and collapses into the timeline that matches what you're observing. The timeline where you don't have what you want but are trying to get it. Think about how a thermometer works. It doesn't care about what temperature you want. It measures what is and responds to that measurement. Your consciousness works the same way. It's a measuring device that collapses probability based on what it's actually observing, not what you wish it was observing. And when you're in the energy of trying to manifest, you're observing lack. You're measuring distance. You're collapsing probability into the exact timeline you're trying to escape. In the comments, drop one word that represents what you're ready to shift from trying to manifest into simply being. Maybe it's abundance. Maybe it's love. Maybe it's freedom. Maybe it's something uniquely yours. Let that word be a declaration, a quantum signal you're sending into the field. I spent 5 years locked in this mechanism. Every morning I would wake up and immediately go into my manifestation practice, visualizing the financial freedom I didn't have, affirming the relationship that hadn't appeared, feeling into the health and vitality my body wasn't experiencing. The practices felt productive. They felt like I was taking control, being proactive, doing something about my situation. But energetically, what I was doing every single day was observing and measuring the gap between current reality and desired reality. And that observation was a continuous collapse of probability waves into the timeline where the gap exists, where I'm always in the process of becoming but never actually being. Here's the recognition that changes everything. The decision that actually collapses your dream timeline into your experienced reality. You have to decide that you already exist in that timeline. Not as a belief you try to convince yourself of, not as a feeling you attempt to manufacture, but as an operational decision about which timeline you're going to observe from, act from, and measure reality from. This sounds simple, maybe too simple, but the implications are massive. Because the moment you decide you already exist in your desired timeline, everything about how you interface with reality has to change. If you already existed in the timeline where you have financial abundance, you wouldn't be doing manifestation practices about money. You would just be making decisions about how to use, invest, and enjoy the money that's already flowing. If you already existed in the timeline where you're in your ideal relationship, you wouldn't be visualizing your person or affirming their arrival. You would be living as someone who naturally receives and gives love. If you already existed in the timeline where your body is healthy and vital, you wouldn't be trying to feel that vitality. You would just be moving through your day from that vitality. The decision to already exist in your desired timeline is not positive thinking. It's not pretending. It's a fundamental shift in which probability wave you're collapsing through your moment-to-moment observations and actions. Let me show you exactly how this works in practice, because this is where understanding becomes transformation. When I finally made this decision, when I stopped trying to manifest financial stability and decided I already existed in the timeline where money flows easily, the first thing that happened was nothing. My bank account didn't change. No unexpected checks arrived. But something shifted in how I moved through my day. I stopped checking my account obsessively. I stopped calculating how to make it to the next payment. I stopped operating from the energy of financial anxiety. Not because I forced myself to feel abundant, but because I made the decision that I exist in the timeline where money isn't a problem I need to solve. From that decision, different actions became natural. I invested in a course I'd been wanting to take but had been deferring because I was waiting until I had the money. In the old timeline, that would have felt irresponsible. But from the decision that I already exist in the timeline where money flows, investing in myself felt obvious. I raised my rates on new projects because someone who exists in financial abundance doesn't undercharge. I turned down a client who was difficult and low-paying because someone in my desired timeline wouldn't tolerate that. None of these actions came from trying. They came from the decision about which timeline I'm operating from. And reality responded. Not magically, not instantly, but probabilistically. Over 3 weeks, the course I invested in connected me with someone who needed exactly what I offer. The higher rates attracted better clients who paid without negotiation. The space created by dropping the difficult client got filled by 2 ideal projects. My income doubled in 6 weeks. Not because I manifested it, but because I stopped collapsing probability into the timeline where I need to manifest and started operating from the timeline where abundance is already my reality. Let me break down exactly why trying is the mechanism that keeps you locked in the wrong timeline. Because once you see this pattern clearly, you'll recognize it operating in every area where you've been stuck. Trying contains within it the assumption that you don't have. The energy of effort implies resistance. The act of reaching towards something confirms that it's not here yet. This creates what I call the trying trap, a self-perpetuating loop that can sustain itself for years, even decades, while you believe you're doing everything right. Here's how the trap operates. You identify something you want that you don't currently have. Maybe it's a certain income level. Maybe it's a specific body type. Maybe it's a romantic partner or a career breakthrough. You learn about manifestation, about quantum physics, about timeline shifting. You get excited because finally you have tools to create the reality you want. So you start practicing. You visualize every morning. You affirm throughout the day. You do the techniques precisely as taught. And you wait for reality to shift. Days pass. Weeks pass. Sometimes months. You stay committed to the practice because you've been told consistency is key. You're trying so hard, putting in so much effort, staying so dedicated, but the external reality remains unchanged, or changes so slowly that it's barely perceptible. So you try harder. You add more techniques. You visualize longer. Affirm more intensely. Work with your energy more precisely. The trying intensifies, and the gap between current reality and desired reality remains stable, or sometimes even widens. What you don't realize is that every moment you spend trying is a moment you're observing from the wrong timeline. You're measuring reality from the position of someone who doesn't have what they want but is working to get it. And that measurement collapses probability into the timeline where that statement is true, where you're always working toward but never arriving at your desired reality. The trying itself is the mechanism maintaining the gap, not because trying is bad, but because trying is an observation, a measurement, a quantum collapse into the timeline where trying is necessary. I watched this pattern operate in my life for 5 years before I saw it clearly. Every area where I was trying hard to manifest was an area that remained stuck. Financial abundance, tried relentlessly, stayed out of reach. Ideal relationship, visualized obsessively, never materialized. Physical vitality, affirmed constantly, remained elusive. But the areas of my life that were working, the areas where I experienced flow and ease, those were areas where I wasn't trying. I just existed as someone for whom that thing was natural. I had great friendships, but I'd never tried to manifest them. They just happened naturally from being someone who enjoys connection. I had creative ideas constantly, but I'd never tried to manifest creativity. I just operated as someone who sees possibilities everywhere. The correlation was undeniable. Where trying was absent, results were present. Where trying was intense, results were absent. The trying itself was the problem. If this strikes a chord and fills a gap for you, consider staying connected here. Subscribe and hit the bell icon next to it. This isn't just a channel, it's a frequency. If you felt a nudge or a change while watching, you're already tuned in. We're not just watching content, we're practicing new ways of being. We're not just absorbing, we're creating possibilities. We're not just learning, we're remembering. I'm truly glad you're here. Let's keep growing and shifting together. So how do you actually make the decision to exist in your desired timeline? How do you shift from trying to manifest to simply being? This is where most people get confused, because they think it requires feeling differently or believing something new. But the decision I'm describing is more fundamental than feeling or belief. It's an operational choice about which timeline you're going to act from moment to moment. Here's the practice that makes this tangible. For the next 7 days, I want you to do something radical. Stop all manifestation practices. No visualization, no affirmations, no trying to feel your desired reality. Instead, make one simple decision each morning. Today, I already exist in the timeline where your desired reality is true. Then ask yourself this question. If I already existed in that timeline, what would I do today? Not what would I do to get there? Not what would I do to make it happen? What would I do if I was already there? The difference is subtle but changes everything. Someone trying to get to financial abundance might spend their day looking for opportunities, hustling to create income, worrying about money. Someone who already exists in financial abundance might spend their day choosing which opportunities feel aligned, making investments from overflow, and simply managing the money that's already flowing. Someone trying to manifest their ideal relationship might spend their day visualizing their person, working on their self-worth, preparing themselves to be ready. Someone who already exists in the timeline with their ideal relationship might spend their day enjoying their own company, contributing value to others from fullness, and being naturally open to connection without attachment to outcomes. Do you see the difference? The trying timeline has you reaching toward a future state. The being timeline has you operating from that state now. And which timeline you operate from determines which probability wave collapses into your experienced reality. When I first started this practice, it felt uncomfortable, almost fake. I would ask myself, if I already had financial stability, what would I do today? And my mind would immediately argue, but you don't have it, so this is just pretending. But I stayed with the practice anyway, and what I discovered is that it wasn't pretending. It was a genuine decision about which set of probabilities I was going to collapse through my actions and observations. The person I am in the timeline where money flows easily makes different decisions than the person I am in the timeline where money is scarce. Not dramatically different, but subtly, consistently different in ways that compound. By day 3 of the practice, I noticed something shifting. The background anxiety about money that had been constant for years started to quiet. Not because circumstances changed, but because I was no longer operating from the timeline where that anxiety was appropriate. In the timeline where abundance is already real, financial anxiety doesn't make sense. It's not something I had to force away. It just naturally dissolved as a side effect of the operational decision. By day 7, opportunities started appearing that had nothing to do with my trying. A former colleague reached out asking if I was available for a project. An unexpected refund arrived from a forgotten subscription. Someone offered to pay for a dinner that I'd already decided to spend money on. Small things, but consistent enough that I recognized what was happening. I'd stopped collapsing probability into the trying timeline and started collapsing into the having timeline. and reality was reorganizing itself to match that new measurement. Now, I'm going to give you a specific protocol that lets you verify which timeline you're actually operating from. Because most people think they've made the decision to exist in their desired timeline when they're actually still collapsing into the trying timeline. This verification process makes the difference tangible so you can't fool yourself. For the next 14 days, keep a detailed log with 3 categories. Category 1, trying moments. Every time you catch yourself trying to manifest, trying to feel abundant, trying to be confident, trying to attract anything, write it down. Note what you were doing and what thought or action revealed the trying energy. Category 2, being moments. Every time you catch yourself naturally operating from your desired timeline without effort or trying, write it down. These are moments when you made a decision or took an action that only makes sense if you already exist in that timeline. Category 3, reality responses. Every time something happens in your external reality that matches your desired timeline, write it down. Not just the big things, the small signals, the subtle shifts, the unexpected alignments. What you'll discover after 14 days is a clear pattern. When trying moments dominate your log, reality responses are minimal or absent. When being moments increase, reality responses multiply. It's not mystical correlation. It's quantum mechanics operating at the scale of your lived experience. Your consciousness is always performing measurements that collapse probability. The question is whether those measurements are collapsing the trying timeline or the being timeline. I did this protocol myself for 30 days when I first discovered this mechanism. Week 1, my log was dominated by trying moments. I caught myself visualizing financial abundance 8 times in one day. Every single instance was a measurement that collapsed probability into the timeline where I don't have abundance, but I'm working to get it. Reality responses that week? 0. Actually, worse than 0, because unexpected expenses appeared that matched the lack timeline I was reinforcing. Week 2, I started catching the trying moments earlier and making the operational decision to shift into being moments. Instead of visualizing abundance, I made financial decisions from abundance. Instead of affirming confidence, I took actions that only confident people take. My being moments increased to about 30% of my awareness. Reality responses that week? 3. Small but notable alignments. A surprise discount. A friend paying back a long-forgotten debt. An idea that felt genuinely valuable. Week 3. Being moments dominated. I had internalized the operational decision deeply enough that it became more natural than trying. I stopped catching myself trying because I genuinely shifted into being. Reality responses that week? 7 significant shifts. New client inquiries. Unexpected opportunities. Synchronicities that were undeniable. Week 4. The being timeline had become my default. I wasn't tracking anymore because I was just living from that timeline, and reality reflected it consistently. Here's what nobody tells you about timeline collapse. There's a specific moment, a specific decision point, where probability waves actually collapse from multiple possible timelines into one actualized experience. And that collapse point is not in your visualization practice. It's not in your affirmations. It's not in your trying to feel the reality. The collapse point is in your actions. Specifically, in actions that only make sense if you already exist in your desired timeline. This is the missing piece that makes everything else work. You can visualize abundance for hours, but if your actions are the actions of someone in scarcity, you're collapsing the scarcity timeline. You can affirm confidence constantly, but if your actions are the actions of someone in fear, you're collapsing the fear timeline. Your consciousness might be focused on desired reality during practice, but your actions throughout the day are continuous measurements that collapse probability into actual experience. And actions don't lie. They reveal which timeline you're actually operating from. Let me give you specific examples across different areas so you can identify the collapse point actions in your own life. In finances, Trying timeline actions include constantly checking your bank account, calculating how to make it to the next payment, taking any opportunity regardless of alignment because you need the money, buying cheap versions of things because you can't afford quality, operating from financial emergency mode. Being timeline actions include making financial decisions from strategy, not desperation, investing in yourself and your growth, choosing opportunities based on alignment, not necessity, buying quality when it matters because you trust your financial flow, operating from financial abundance mode even when the number in your account doesn't yet reflect it. The collapse point is the moment you choose the being timeline action over the trying timeline action. That choice is a quantum measurement that starts collapsing probability toward the timeline where that action makes sense. In relationships, trying timeline actions include monitoring your phone for messages, adjusting your behavior to attract interest, filling your time with distractions to avoid loneliness, settling for relationships that don't fulfill you because something is better than nothing, operating from relationship scarcity mode. Being timeline actions include enjoying your own company fully, expressing yourself authentically without calibrating for approval, being genuinely available to connection without desperate attachment, naturally filtering for aligned relationships, operating from relationship abundance mode. Again, the collapse point is in the actions. When you choose the being timeline action, you're collapsing probability toward the timeline where you're someone who naturally experiences fulfilling relationships. In health and vitality, trying timeline actions include forcing yourself through exercise you hate, restricting food from deprivation mindset, obsessively monitoring symptoms, treating your body as an enemy to be controlled, operating from health anxiety mode. Being timeline actions include moving your body in ways that feel good, nourishing yourself from self-respect, not restriction, trusting your body's intelligence, treating your body as a partner, operating from vitality mode. The pattern is consistent across every area. Trying timeline actions come from lack, fear, desperation, need to control, need to force results. Being timeline actions come from sufficiency, trust, natural preference, allowing results to emerge. And every single action you take is a collapse point, a quantum measurement that determines which timeline probability you're actualizing in your experience. Drop a word in the comments that captures what you're committing to embody today. Trust, flow, joy, ease. Your word matters. It's a quantum signal anchoring your decision into the field. Now I'm going to give you a specific challenge that will prove whether this mechanism is real in your direct experience. Not theory, not belief, direct verification. Choose one area of your life where you've been trying to manifest a change. Just one area. For the next 48 hours, commit to this protocol. 0 trying timeline actions. Every single action you take in this area must be an action that only makes sense if you already exist in your desired timeline. If it's finances, that means for 48 hours, every financial decision you make is made from abundance consciousness. Even if your account is low, even if you feel scared, the decision itself must be what someone in your desired financial timeline would make. If it's relationships, that means for 48 hours, every interaction, every choice about your time, every expression of yourself is what someone who already has their ideal relationship would naturally do. If it's health, that means for 48 hours, every choice about food, movement, rest, self-care is what someone who already embodies vitality would naturally choose. This will feel uncomfortable. Your mind will argue. Your old patterns will pull you back toward trying timeline actions. That's normal. The moment you notice you've slipped into a trying timeline action, stop, reset, make the operational decision again. I already exist in the timeline where this is real. Then choose the being timeline action. Do this relentlessly for 48 hours and track what happens. Write down every being timeline action you take. Write down every moment you almost slipped into trying but caught yourself. Write down every shift in your internal state. Write down everything that happens in your external reality during these 48 hours. What you're going to discover is that being timeline actions create a completely different energetic signature than trying timeline actions. They feel more natural, more aligned, more like you're finally being yourself rather than performing a version of yourself. And reality responds to that signature rapidly because you're finally collapsing probability into the timeline where what you want is already real. I've had clients do this 48-hour protocol and experience measurable shifts that seemed impossible. One woman, who'd been trying to manifest her business success for 2 years, made the decision to exist in the timeline where she's already a successful entrepreneur for 48 hours. Every business decision she made was from that timeline. She raised her rates, something she'd been scared to do for months. She declined a project that felt misaligned even though she needed the money. She invested in professional photos because that's what successful entrepreneurs do. Within those 48 hours, she got an inquiry from a dream client she'd been wanting to work with for a year. Not because she manifested them, but because she finally collapsed into the timeline where she's someone that dream client would want to work with. Another client had been trying to manifest weight loss for 5 years, trying every protocol, every technique, every manifestation method. Nothing worked. She did the 48-hour protocol, making every single decision about food, movement, and self-care from the timeline where she already has the body she desires, not forcing, not restricting, just choosing what someone in that timeline would naturally choose. In 48 hours, she lost 3 pounds. But more importantly, the obsessive food thoughts that had dominated her awareness for years went quiet. She'd collapsed into a different timeline where her relationship with her body was fundamentally different. Here's the ultimate paradox that dissolves the entire structure of manifestation work. The moment you stop trying to manifest, the moment you make the operational decision that you already exist in your desired timeline, everything you were trying to manifest starts appearing naturally. Not because you did the right technique, but because you stopped doing techniques from the wrong timeline. Manifestation doesn't fail because you're not doing it right. Manifestation fails because doing it at all is an observation from the trying timeline. And that observation collapses probability into the trying timeline where manifestation is necessary because you don't have what you want. The solution is not better manifestation techniques. The solution is stopping manifestation entirely and making the single decision that you already exist where you want to be, then acting from that timeline consistently until reality catches up to the probability wave you're collapsing. This sounds too simple. Your mind will resist it because you've invested so much time, energy, and identity into being someone who manifests. But the resistance itself is proof that you're still operating from the trying timeline. Someone who already exists in their desired timeline wouldn't resist this recognition. They would just naturally be living from that timeline without needing to prove it or defend it. I know this challenges everything you've learned about manifestation. I know it contradicts the teachings that tell you to visualize, to feel it real, to affirm constantly. But I'm giving you the actual mechanism that those teachings are pointing toward, without understanding the quantum mechanics beneath them. When teachers tell you to feel it real, what they're actually pointing toward is the operational decision to exist in the timeline where it's already real. But because they frame it as feeling work, as trying to generate an emotion, people end up doing feeling practices from the trying timeline, which reinforces the trying timeline rather than collapsing into the being timeline. The feeling isn't something you generate. The feeling is something that emerges naturally when you genuinely make the operational decision and start acting from that decision. When I decided I already exist in the timeline where money flows easily, I didn't try to feel abundant. I just stopped doing the actions of someone in financial scarcity. And as a natural side effect, the feeling of abundance emerged, not because I manufactured it, but because my actions were collapsing probability into the timeline where that feeling is the natural state. Make sure you share this video with someone who's been stuck in the manifestation loop, trying technique after technique without results. You might be the catalyst that shifts their entire understanding. By sharing, you're not just passing along information, you're spreading a quantum shift in how people relate to their own power. And that positive energy will amplify your own timeline collapse. The final piece is understanding how to integrate this operational decision into your life permanently. Because the decision itself is simple, but maintaining the decision requires vigilance until the new timeline becomes your default. Here's exactly how to make this integration permanent. Week 1. Awareness training. Your only job this week is to notice when you're operating from trying timeline versus being timeline. Don't try to change anything yet. Just build awareness of the two different energies. Notice how trying timeline actions feel versus being timeline actions. Notice the thoughts that accompany each. Notice the body sensations. Build a felt sense of the difference. Week 2. Decision reinforcement. Now start making the operational decision consciously every morning. Today I already exist in the timeline where desired reality is real. Throughout the day, when you notice yourself slipping into trying timeline, stop, remake the decision, shift the action. Do this as many times as necessary. You're retraining your default setting from trying to being. Week 3. Action consistency. This week, commit to making every major action a being timeline action. Not perfection, just consistency in the important decisions. Financial decisions from abundance. Relationship choices from fullness. Health actions from vitality. Let the small unconscious actions be whatever they are, but make the conscious choices consistently from your desired timeline. Week 4. Reality verification. By week 4, reality should be showing you clear evidence that the timeline is collapsing. You're seeing synchronicities, unexpected opportunities, shifts in circumstances that match your desired timeline. Document these carefully. Not to prove anything, but to train your brain to recognize the correlation between your operational decision and reality's response. This builds trust in the mechanism, which makes maintaining the decision easier. After 30 days of this integration process, the being timeline becomes more natural than the trying timeline. You've created new neural pathways, new default patterns, new automatic responses. You're no longer someone who tries to manifest their desired reality. You're someone who naturally exists in that reality and simply allows the physical circumstances to catch up to the probability wave you're collapsing through your consistent operational decision and aligned actions. Everything I've described in these thousands of words comes down to one single decision. Will you continue operating from the timeline where you don't have what you want but are trying to get it? Or will you make the decision right now, in this moment, to exist in the timeline where what you want is already real, not as a belief, not as a feeling you have to maintain, but as an operational decision that determines every action you take from this moment forward? The decision is available now. You don't need to prepare for it. You don't need to become worthy of it. You don't need to clear blocks or heal trauma or raise your vibration first. Those are all trying timeline concepts. The being timeline decision is available right now because every possible timeline exists simultaneously as probability in the quantum field. You're just choosing which one to collapse into your experience through your moment-to-moment observations and actions. I made this decision 18 months ago, and my entire life reorganized itself around that decision. Not instantly, not magically, but probabilistically over weeks and months. The financial stress that had been constant for years dissolved. The relationship patterns that kept repeating shifted. The health issues that seemed permanent resolved. Not because I manifested these changes, but because I stopped collapsing probability into the timeline where those problems existed and started operating from the timeline where they'd already been resolved. Your dream timeline is not somewhere in the future waiting for you to manifest it. Your dream timeline exists right now as a probability wave in the quantum field. The only question is whether you're going to keep collapsing into the trying timeline through manifestation practices, or whether you're going to make the one decision that instantly collapses your dream timeline into your experienced reality. Stop trying to manifest. Start being what you want to experience. The probability wave is waiting for your decision.